A reading from the Gospel according to Matthew. And Jesus said, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint, dill, and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. It is these you ought to have practiced without neglecting the others. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat but swallow a camel. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you clean the outside of the cup and of the plate, but the inside are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup, so that the outside also may become clean." The word of the Lord. Now this is going to be fun, because this section of Matthew 23, because of the way that we record the sermon videos, I have no idea yet what Lisa said yesterday on the video sermon or what she's going to say for tomorrow's video sermon, where Jesus for 3 long days calls the Pharisees hypocrites and rants and raves at them. So we'll see if we end up confirming each other or contradicting each other or just saying the exact same thing for 3 sermons in a row. It'll be fun to see. What I choose to look at in this is Jesus is being quite confrontational and name-calling the Pharisees. And this has become so rooted in our culture that today, to even refer to someone as a Pharisee means to refer to them as a hypocrite. And I want us to take a step back from that for just a moment to realize it's actually unhelpful to look at all of the Pharisees and by extension, Judaism as a monolith in that way, because that's the kind of thing that can lead to hate and stereotyping and even worse, anti-Semitism. It's important to look at this statement and understand Jesus was talking to a particular group of people in a particular moment where he saw them struggling with simple performative solutions to complex problems that were really about loving themselves and not loving God and loving their neighbors as themselves. And he's really condemning the action, not the person. I think that's important here. Because of course there were many different groups in this time of Judaism. This is the pre-rabbinic but post-Maccabean time in the Jewish life, in which you had the Zealots and you had the Sadducees and you had the Essenes and you had the Pharisees, and it really wasn't clear. And then you can even include in that this group of people that would have been seen as Jews that were following Jesus as the identified Messiah. That's 5 different groups of people that nobody really had any way of knowing at that time which one was going to end up prevailing. It wasn't until years and years after this event happened, when the temple is destroyed and the Zealots are discredited, the Sadducees have lost their temple because they were focused in the temple, and you had the first Christian people that started to be identified as not a part of the Jewish tradition. And it was the Pharisees who end up being the people who formed the basis of what would later turn into Rabbinic Judaism. And I can promise you that the core tenet of it was not hypocrisy. The core tenet of it was trying to give people a guide for how you can make the choices in your life that will bring you closer to God and closer to the people around you. Now, if you recall, that's exactly what Jesus said. Jesus actually would have been quite like the Pharisees in many ways that would be surprising because of how we've stereotyped it in the way we tell the story. But the Pharisees, among all of those groups, would have been the most likely ones, I think, to believe in the idea of loving the spirit of the law and upholding the spirit of the law as being more important than being locked into the strict observance of the letter of the law. Again, that's rather like Jesus. So what he sees in this moment is not condemning the Pharisees for being who they are, but rather an action he's seeing that's concerning, which is that when you're choosing how you're going to follow the law, and when you're choosing how you're going to follow the spirit of the law, I warn that you're doing it in a way that's uplifting your position in power against these other rival groups, where you're more interested in what's going to keep me in safe and in power and in control, and that shouldn't be your primary focus. And it's also not what you're teaching your people. This is the hypocritical part. You're teaching your people to make decisions not based on what's going to be good for them, but what's going to be good for loving God and loving your neighbor better. And Jesus, as a valid part of the sea of people trying to figure out who's going to lead and how, Jesus is saying to them, it's important that your actions support your words, because your message is actually a good message, but I'm not seeing it backed up in the way you're choosing to live your lives. And Jesus ultimately loves them and wants them to. He wants to support the Pharisees, and so he's giving them good advice so that they can continue to do the good things they're saying about loving God and loving your neighbor. So let us think about that a little bit whenever we are hearing one of these passages that we might be too quick to use to dehumanize or stereotype people from then, and especially people from today. Amen.